What's going on, everyone? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. It is Tuesday, November 29th, 2022. I'm your host, Max Torres. Appreciate you guys taking some time out of your day to talk some Duck football. Wherever you're watching or listening, make sure you do me a favor. Take a second out of your day to like, comment, and subscribe. Really appreciate that. We are on the road to 2,000 subscribers. Here on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres. If you guys are here in the live chat, go ahead and leave me a comment or ask me a question, and I'll do my best to get to as many as possible. Let me know how you're feeling about this news and about the transfer portal in general. Definitely setting up to be a busy offseason for Oregon, and it's not even the offseason yet, considering that the regular season is over and you still have the bowl game ahead of you. So today's story, the focus of today's episode, Oregon Ducks wide receiver Dont'e Thornton has entered the transfer portal. This news coming on kind of late Monday night. I think it was around 6 or 7 o'clock, on the West Coast. So before we get into this news and kind of breaking it down, what it means for Oregon, what it means for Dante, etc., just wanted to throw on his announcement, the post over social media. Always want to start these stories with the players' words, so we can put that out there. So Dante wrote on social media, quote, "First off, I want to start by saying thank you to Coach Lanning, Coach Adams, and the entire University of Oregon coaching staff and family for all the love and support they have provided me over this past football season at Oregon. I would also like to thank each and every one of my teammates for always pushing me to be the best version of myself on and off the field. Truly, after countless hours of thinking while serious discussions with my family about this, I would like to announce that I am entering the transfer portal. I'll always be a Duck at heart, but it's time for me to move on to the next chapter of my football career and make sure that I make the right decision for myself. With much love, Dante Thornton Jr., #FreeMac." So that's the big news off the top, and then just kind of wanted to get into a little bit more background about Dante, how his seasons have gone at Oregon. I think an easy way to start this is kind of just Dante as a recruit, because I was fortunate enough to talk to Dante a couple times during his recruitment before he got to Oregon. He signed with the Ducks as a 4-star signee, high 4-star recruit in the 2021 recruiting class. Looking at the 247 Sports composite, he was a 4-star, .9719, ranked the number 57 player in the country, the number 7 wide receiver, and the number 2 player out of the state of Maryland. Dante attended Mount St. Joseph High School in Baltimore, Maryland, had 28 reported offers, and was an Adidas All-American. Another thing to note here on Dante's recruitment, before he got to Oregon, he was committed to Penn State. So maybe Penn State is a school to watch here, seeing that he was a longtime Penn State commit before he committed to Oregon. He came out to visit for the spring game, I believe it was his senior year. And then Oregon was kind of in the driver's seat once he chose to reopen his recruitment. That was, of course, during the Mario Cristobal era at that time when Brian McClendon was at Oregon. So this is one of those players, along with, I was going to say along with Seven McGee because he moved to wide receiver, but Seven McGee was recruited to Oregon by Jim Mastro, the former Oregon running backs coach, and Dante Thornton was recruited to Oregon by Brian McClendon, who's now on staff in the SEC with Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs. So I think that this is just one of the kind of trends, if you want to call it, that we're going to see this offseason. And what I mean by that when I say trends is that you're seeing players, and it's not even going to be just Oregon, you're going to see players across the country that are leaving their respective schools that weren't recruited by the coaches that are necessarily in charge. So that's just kind of something that happens. It's a challenge that comes with how volatile college football has become in the era of the coaching carousel, the transfer portal, name, image, and likeness. College football is just crazy now. So I also want to make sure I'm putting it out there that I don't criticize any of these players for any of their decisions. I'm just a journalist, sharing my thoughts on these decisions and trying to create a dialogue and, build the community so that you guys can talk about it as fans and I can kind of give my take. But players have to do what's best for them at the end of the day, and I definitely wish Dante nothing but the best. He was an awesome guy to talk to during his time as a recruit, and then while I was still living in Eugene, getting to talk to him and watch him kind of grow and mature at Oregon. So I wanted to make sure I put that out there because, in today's era of the transfer portal and, flip season, things get crazy when it comes to recruiting. There's just too many people on social media that are just so quick to criticize players for their decisions. And, they're the ones that work their tail off to get to that school. We're just, watching it. We have no idea. Everyone has a story. So I just wanted to preface, and just mention that because, if you're a Duck fan watching my show, I think that that you kind of play a little bit of a role in just how players are, perceived by the fan base. So we don't need to be, talking nasty on social media and criticizing players. So I'm not criticizing any Duck fans by any means. I'm just saying, we see it with recruiting a lot. We don't need to be criticizing these guys and, saying all kinds of mean things on social media. So just wanted to get that out there. But let's talk about Dont'e Thornton because he was one of three wide receivers that Oregon signed in the class of 2021 under Brian McClendon. 3 All-American wide receivers, I might add. Troy Franklin being the headliner of the bunch out of Menlo-Atherton in the Bay Area. Isaiah Brevard being another one from the state of Mississippi. So that was another big-time receiver haul. At the time when Dante committed, that was, I think, almost unquestionably the best wide receiver haul that the Ducks have had in quite some time. So for Dante to be on the move this quickly, definitely hurts, where Oregon's at from a wide receiver depth standpoint. 6'5", 200 pounds. I think that he had an awesome frame for, where Oregon wants to go offensively. I think a lot of people took notice of how he kind of morphed his body and put more muscle onto his frame throughout spring football. I mean, he was one of those guys that you saw walking around the facility or walking around after practice, and you're like, dang, he's been in the weight room for sure. So Dante's definitely, got that great work ethic. Didn't really carve out too big of a role during his time at Oregon. I think that it definitely got off to a strong start. He took his first college touch to the crib for a touchdown. That was a pass from Ty Thompson in the game against Stony Brook in 2021. So he did show and has shown, some of that big playability, flashing at moments in Oregon. And I said this a couple of weeks ago, or I guess about a month ago now, after the Cal game when Chase Cota went down. But when Chase Cota went down, I kind of looked at that. Obviously, you never want a player to get hurt. But I kind of looked at that as like, oh, okay, this is an opportunity for Dante to kind of step up and get some more snaps, get some more catches. And we kind of saw him ebb and flow a little bit. I thought he was going to be more involved in the meantime when his number was called on during that stretch when they didn't have Chase Cota. And I think, it's not a stretch to say that his best game of the year came against Utah. I mean, he came up with some huge, huge catches in that game to move the sticks, had a touchdown in the Washington game. So it was really exciting to see both him and Troy Franklin score in that Utah game. 4 catches for 151 total yards, with a long of 58. I think if Dont'e Thornton isn't maybe playing in that game, if Dont'e Thornton doesn't come up with some of those catches in that game against Utah, I don't know if Oregon wins that game. And as we know, was the story with a lot of Oregon games this year, the Ducks still played in some close games. You had the close win over Utah. You had the close win over Washington State. And then you also had close losses to Washington. And then you had the collapse against Oregon State this past week. So, there's a lot of games that could have gone either way for Oregon. But I think this is the kind of receiver that Oregon had been lacking for a little bit, right? You had, your guys like Dwayne Stanford that were those taller wide receivers. But 6'5" with Dante's kind of track speed. I really thought that he was underutilized at Oregon. Along with a lot of other People in the Oregon community maybe thought that he was going to have a much larger role with the Ducks in 2022. But we started to see those flashes as he got more involved. In that Utah game, he had a fumble, which was obviously tough. But when he got out in space and was really able to do his thing, I thought that, he was one of the better receivers on this team, and he was just kind of starting to get comfortable, it looked like. So, encouraging to see him play as a true freshman for the Ducks in 2021. I really thought he was going to be more involved even as a true freshman, because Oregon's wide receiver room wasn't that strong in 2021, right? You had Micah Pittman, Devin Williams, Jalen Redd, Johnny Johnson. I didn't think that those guys were, just so supremely talented that you had to have them on the field. But that's why I'm not a coach. So I'm not the one that's making these decisions to have guys on the field at certain times or not. And, you have to develop and get more comfortable. Dante saw kind of more of his playing time when the Ducks got banged up and were kind of lacking at wide receiver in terms of depth against Utah down the stretch. You had the Utah game and then Oregon State and then the Pac-12 championship game against Utah. So, this was the most snaps he'd seen since he got to Oregon, but after 2 seasons, he's going to be moving on to look for his next stop. Definitely there's going to be no shortage of interest for Dont'e Thornton in the transfer portal scene, as he was one of the more sought after wide receivers coming out of high school. And, just because he maybe didn't play that much, I don't think that that's done anything to, hurt his stock, so to speak. You have the NFL draft, and then you have recruiting stock, and the transfer portal now. So it's going to be a crazy time for sure, tracking all these movements in the transfer portal. It hasn't been a ton of movement just yet. Dont'e Thornton was the second Oregon player to enter the transfer portal this season, after Seven McGee announced his intentions to enter the transfer portal earlier this month in November. Another guy that you really thought was going to get more involved at Oregon, but never really carved out a really significant role, had some work on and off as a return specialist. But yeah, so now you have 2 guys from the 2021 class that are in the transfer portal after Dante announced on Monday evening that he would be entering the transfer portal. So let's take a look at where this leaves Oregon's wide receiver room, as of right now. Oregon's wide receiver room right now, you have Troy Franklin, who is the leading receiver in 2022 so far. Then you have Chris Hudson, who looks like he could be coming back for another season. I'm not going off of any intel or anything. I'm just saying, as it stands, you have Troy Franklin, you have Chris Hudson. I believe Chase Cota doesn't have any more eligibility, but he had a really strong game against Oregon State. So good to see him end his college career on a high note. Isaiah Brevard is still on the roster. You have Kyler Casper from the 2022 class. He's supposed to be finishing his senior year of high school right now out in Arizona, but they got him to reclassify and got him to Oregon early. You also have Justice Lowe, Isaiah Crocker on the roster at wide receiver. I'm trying to think if I'm missing any huge names, because I definitely don't want to do that. So let's go ahead and just pull up the roster on my other screen here. All right, Hudson, I already talked about him. Oh, you also have Josh Delgado. He's someone on the roster that hasn't played a whole lot. Saw some playing time this year after some injuries, but he's another former scholarship guy. But I feel like Oregon's wide receiver room, could look a little bit different, by the time we get out to next season. So, you also have, thank you, Apollo. You also have Caleb Chapman. He hasn't seen the field very much this year. He's kind of battled some injuries on and off. But yeah, he's also with the team. It says he's a senior on Go Ducks. So I'm not sure. Let's see how many. Class of 2018. He redshirted in 18, 19, 20, 21. So this would be his 5th year, but COVID. So I think Caleb Chapman could come back, I want to say, if he chose to. So you have some more options there from a wide receiver standpoint. But like I said, I thought Dont'e Thornton was the tallest wide receiver on this team, I think. I want to say Casper is around that same height. Casper is 6'6", 193. So I think that, Casper could potentially fill into a role that Dante was filling at Oregon. But he's a freshman, and he obviously has some more development that he needs to ultimately see the field a little bit more than he did this year in 2022. But this is a significant name, obviously. Like I'm saying, going into the transfer portal for Dont'e Thornton. Going into the Baltimore area is definitely very important. We know that he was really close friends with Damon David, a safety at Oregon, who also came out of Maryland, so in the Baltimore area. They signed together with the Ducks. So who knows? Who knows what the next moves are for Oregon in the transfer portal, whether it be players leaving or players that Oregon's going to be going after. It's just crazy. I think that all this is happening before the season's even over, right? That's kind of the biggest takeaway, is that Kenny Dillingham left after the Oregon State game. You have players entering the transfer portal ahead of the bowl game. I'd imagine that Oregon's going to have some NFL draft declarations before too long, and then we'll have to see if they play in the bowl game. But Oregon's bowl game isn't going to be anything super exciting now, seeing that they can't go to the playoff, which was within reach at one point this season. The Rose Bowl was also within reach at a certain time. So, the wheels just kind of fell off on this Oregon season. And I'm not saying that's the reason that guys are entering the transfer portal. But it's just, it's a little bit deflating, I think, if you're an Oregon fan, because it felt so achievable. But it's important to note that this isn't necessarily the same thing as last year, right? You had no coaching adjustments against Utah. Those games were not winnable. But some of these Oregon losses down the stretch were definitely games that you could have won. Simeon, the big screen, says good luck to him. Sco Ducky, this transfer portal around the country about to get wild. Yeah, no, it definitely is. I think we're already seeing a lot of players from Texas A&M enter the transfer portal. After just the crazy season that they had in terms of just not living up to potential. They had that number one signing class, I want to say, in 2022. They had so much talent there, and then they had Jimbo Fisher, and I think they finished, I want to say it was 3-7. The last time that I saw it, but I don't know if that was what their actual final record was. Now that the season's over. In 2022, they finished 5-7. And I know Jimbo Fisher's buyout is super, super expensive. But yeah, that was kind of the first school that we saw where there were a lot of players already entering the transfer portal. So I tweeted the other day that it's crazy that we're already seeing tweets about entering the portal, even though the window isn't technically open. I want to say it's December 5th that it opens, but it's another dimension to college football that we have to track. Cod Mod Killer says he is a great talent, but needed more book work, in my opinion. He needed to learn the nuances of the position. Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason that he looked more comfortable as he played more in 2022, right? I think that there were definitely times in 2021 where he didn't look maybe as sure of himself, but he was getting called upon, from that game, those games against Utah late in the season. So I thought he started to look a lot better. And the more touches that he got, he got more confidence. He was starting to work as a deep threat option. And in that game against Utah and against Washington, there were some plays where he just took the top off the defense. But I think that really just comes with time and having more time to work with the playbook and getting more reps. So maybe that's kind of a big takeaway from the regular season, is that we didn't see quite as much rotation. I don't think we saw as much rotation as I was maybe expecting at the wide receiver position this year. Could be part of the reason that you saw a Seven McGee transfer. And then maybe part of the reason with Dante here, right? Obviously, playing time is always going to be a huge, huge factor. Brooks says, we still have guys like Casper. We'll get in guys like Kozart and Jurion. We are set at the wide receiver position with or without Thornton. Yeah, that's a good thing to look at is I talked about guys that are already on the roster for Oregon and that, will project as of right now to be at Oregon in 2023, but we don't know, more news could come. We just got to be ready for anything. But right now in the 2023 class, you have Jurion Dickey, who is the number 2 wide receiver in the country, I believe, on 247, committed to Oregon, as well as Ashton Kozart. Saw Jurion last week. He said he is 100% committed to Oregon. But there are still some big time schools that are pursuing him in this recruitment that he's still hearing from. Schools like Tennessee, Texas A&M, and Penn State. Those are some of the big schools that are still hitting him up. He's going to be playing basketball for Menlo Atherton after suffering a season-ending injury, and that only allowed him to play 4 games for Menlo Atherton as a senior. But he's going to be playing basketball to kind of ease back into some of those explosive movements. And he looked like he is probably going to be looking around a February timeframe for signing his national letter of intent. So that does kind of leave the door open, obviously. And he said he was about 50-50 for enrolling early, and if anything, it would be in the spring. So those are kind of some of the updates you have with wide receivers like Jurion. He obviously becomes so important. I talked a little bit about the recruiting impact of Kenny Dillingham's departure. Any coordinator is going to have his hand in, that side of the ball, right? So I'm sure there was some involvement with Kenny Dillingham and Jurion Dickey during his time while he was at Oregon, helping the staff recruit Jurion. But the big relationship there is Junior Adams with Jurion Dickey. They're both Bay Area guys. He said that, he's like my right-hand man. He's always been rocking with him, whether he was at Washington, whether he was at Oregon. So that's the biggest thing you have to watch right now. And I think Junior Adams is going to be interesting to watch because he's a name that we're seeing floated around for offensive coordinator if Oregon were to look at promoting from within. The wide receiver group has seen a tremendous amount of growth this year. I think that's partially because of Junior Adams being added to the staff, as well as just the overall improvement of the offense and maybe more guys getting opportunities. So Jurion and Junior Adams have a super strong relationship. And, I think as of right now, I'm not super worried, but Oregon's going to have to, stay on Jurion without a doubt because all these big schools, some of these big schools are still in the picture. And we all know recruiting's not over until you sign that dotted line. And even now you could say that it's not over after that because of the craziness with the transfer portal. Really like Ashton Kozart, I feel like his stock continues to climb as a wide receiver. Not a wide receiver, but one guy that I also looked at the other day was Kenyon Sadiq. Oregon's he's like a top 10 athlete in the 2023 class. Looks like he's going to be playing some tight end at Oregon, but he's ranked the number 3 commit on Oregon's 2023 recruiting class right now. So he's someone I definitely want to learn a little bit more about and see what's going on there. All right, let's see. See me on the big screen says, would like to get a good QB if Bo leaves. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what's so interesting about Kenny Dillingham's departure, right? Because you have 2 quarterbacks now that become super important, that become your priority number 1. When it comes to finding a new offensive coordinator and recruits that you need to, keep, or guys that you want to keep in the fold, right? With Dante as a recruit, you want to keep him in the fold in the 2023 recruiting class. With Bo, you want to keep him at Oregon if possible. And that's part of the reason that people are saying, I think Oregon needs to move quickly to find this next offensive coordinator, because then you can sit him down with Dante Moore. You can sit him down with Bo Nix, say, this is my plan. This is how we want to use you. These are the elements that are going to carry over from last year. These are some elements that are maybe going to be new. So Oregon's offensive coordinator hire absolutely plays a pivotal role in the quarterback position. We'll see if they're the quarterback's coach as well, because that's what Dillingham was doing. I would assume that's probably going to be the case. But now Oregon has to, focus on 2 quarterbacks, Bo Nix, who's already on campus and you want to get him to stay, and then Dante Moore as well. You want to get him to stay. And he seems like a really calculated guy. Was definitely worn out by the recruiting process the first time around, but there's no doubt that there's going to be some big schools that circle back around on Dante, seeing that Oregon looks a little bit vulnerable now, not only because of the way the regular season ended, but because, you could argue Dante Moore's main recruiter, or one of the biggest reasons he went to Oregon, is no longer there. So that's going to be a big storyline to track, because if Bo Nix leaves, then you're essentially in the same exact spot you were last offseason. You have no quarterbacks that have any proven success at the college level. Not trying to slight Ty Thompson, not trying to slight Jay Butterfield. That's just the reality of the situation. Ty hasn't played a ton, but when he does play, it's been a little bit shaky. Jay Butterfield really hasn't seen the field very much. So I wouldn't be surprised if Bo Nix leaves. I would definitely expect Oregon to be very involved in the transfer portal when it comes to quarterbacks. And then I also said, if they were to lose Dante Moore, they're probably going to have to be even more heavily involved in the transfer portal, or you're going to be pushing for guys that are committed to other schools. That's kind of just my 2 cents on that. Let's see here. What other questions do we have? Mikey G, he's a frequent listener. What's up, Mikey? Mikey says, all the best to DTJ. He'll be wide receiver 1 to most schools looking to the transfer portal. Just too deep of a receiver room. Who would have thunk 11 months ago? Yeah, I think that's definitely a fair point. I think following the hire of Junior Adams and Dan Lanning, I think that the wide receiver room was one of the rooms that was transformed the most from the end of last season to the group of guys that we saw this year, right? Last year, you had Johnny Johnson, Jalen Redd, Devin Williams, Micah Pittman all leave. So that's 4 guys that move on from the program. And then you bring in Chase Cota, you bring in Caleb Chapman, Justice Lowe, to name a few, but not all those guys necessarily get super involved. So Chase Cota was the guy that kind of had that biggest, new role from a new addition standpoint. Troy Franklin emerges as wide receiver 1. Chris Hudson looks like he's just getting better and better with each game. I think that Chris and Troy really complement each other. They really complement each other well. And then you have, Dante kind of emerging a little bit more. Seven McGee was used a little bit more earlier in the season. And then you bring in Kyler Casper, but he doesn't necessarily start early. So I think that's a group that you felt really confident about. But I don't know. This is a point that this comment kind of reminds me of a point that Brian McClendon made when we were talking to him during his time at Oregon. He was saying, I'd rather have a really talented, I think he said, when we were asking him about all these young wideouts, he said, I think I have a really talented wide receiver room. I don't think I have a very deep receiver room right now. And I think the key difference there is kind of like where Oregon's quarterback room is at, right? You have a lot of talented quarterbacks, but not a lot of depth there, because when Bo goes down, the quarterback becomes a big question mark in those games like Washington, right? So, yeah, I think Oregon's wide receiver room is really talented. I don't know how deep I would say it is. I'd say that I probably think like the running back room is maybe a little bit deeper, or like the tight end room is deeper in terms of guys that you can turn to and have a couple of different options and not expect too much drop off. But I do really like Oregon's wide receiver room. And I think if you add these guys like Jurion Dickey and Ashton Kozart, you maybe get some guys out of the transfer portal as well. I think that, you're in the position to kind of navigate a loss like this relatively effectively. Brooks Durham says, I hope Casper stays. I don't want to lose him. Yeah, Kyler Casper is a guy that I'm super, super high on. Was really excited when he committed as a recruit. His commitment video had him doing behind the back dunks in high school. 6'6", 190, 195 kind of guy. Super, super athletic. I think that was one of the reasons, there just wasn't that much for him to gain by going back to high school for another year. Just get to the college level and get ready. So I think that 2023 could be the year where we really see that early enrollment pay off for a guy like Kyler Casper, who is a playmaker, matchup nightmare, go-getter, go up and get it kind of guy, red zone threat. So I think that I'm pretty stoked about his potential during his time at Oregon. So we'll have to continue to track his development and see what's going on. All right, let's see here. What else do we got? Let's see. Another question from Mikey. I like this question. Mikey says, Max, any ideas on who Oregon will target in current batch of portal entrants needs? Seems O-line is still a priority. Yeah, as we get more into the transfer portal season, Mikey, I'm definitely going to have to do some digging on some more names. I think that offensive line is definitely still a priority for Oregon, despite the recent success that they've had recruiting prep guys in the 2023 class. Because I'm still trying to feel out, how many of those guys I feel like can actually, start as true freshmen, right? I feel like maybe you're looking at Iapani Laulaulu in terms of guys that can maybe start early on the interior. Marcus Harper should probably be back. Josh Connerly played a decent amount as a freshman. Maybe we'll see where Dawson Jaramillo is. Stephen Jones could come back. He's definitely an interesting name to monitor when we're talking offensive line because, for all the injuries that Oregon had pop up late in the season, it was a big benefit that Stephen Jones was able to come back. And then Alex Forsythe came back, Ryan Walk came back to play. But we know that Harper and Jones are kind of those main, entrenched guys that are usually in the starting lineup or, in the rotation that could be coming back next year. So would not be surprised at all to see Oregon go for, some more JUCO guys or some guys in the transfer portal. Even though George Silva is a JUCO guy in the 2023 class for Oregon, he is still super, super raw and new to football. This is only his first full year of playing. So I would definitely wager that O-line is going to be a priority for Oregon in the transfer portal. I think in the secondary, you definitely have to look at, guys there for the defensive backs, seeing that Oregon was just getting torched in the passing game all year. I can't even begin to imagine what the defense would have looked like without Christian Gonzalez this year. I think that that's definitely one of the big success stories for Dan Lanning and the Ducks in his first year, going into the transfer portal to get a guy like Christian Gonzalez that can be a plug and play, more or less lockdown guy, cornerback number one for you. So I think that definitely has to be a big position for the Ducks to look at is corner. I'd also throw out safety, right? I'm pretty sure that Bennett Williams is going to be wrapped up after this. And then maybe Steve Stevens, I would think too. He's a 2018 guy. I'm not sure how much eligibility he has left. I'm kind of just trying to bring up some of the older guys. Maybe Brian Addison too, if he's able to come back. Let's see, this is 2018, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. But you take off. I gotta do some more math on that. But Brian Addison has definitely improved a lot this year. But that said, I think that you still want to be adding guys and bringing more competition into that room. You've added guys recently like Trajan Williams and Kamari Terrell in the 2022 class, the Jaleel Florence, Jaleel Tucker. Jaleel Florence has played a pretty decent amount this year. I think he burned his red shirt. So I think O-line and corner should definitely be – O-line and secondary should definitely be, positions. I think you're going to end up looking at people in the portal at every position almost, because there's going to be some guys that if they give you a call, you're not going to turn them away saying that they want to go to Oregon if they're really, talented and you feel like they can start right away. And I saw something so interesting on Twitter. I can't remember who said it, but they said that transfer portal recruiting could become more important than high school recruiting, which is probably a good point. And I don't think that it's all that unrealistic, because transfer portal guys are, more or less like, imagine if you got 5 guys of Christian Gonzalez's caliber out of the transfer portal. Those are 5 spots on your roster where you don't have to worry like, oh yeah, we have to kind of bring this guy along a little bit and try to hope he develops and hope we get him here early as an early enrollee. Hope he does well in spring. Hope he does well in fall. No, you're not asking yourself those kind of questions. You're like, hey, this guy's here. He's contributed. He's ready to go. And I think that obviously, is appealing to any coach. So those are kind of some early thoughts there, Mikey, but that's going to be something we're definitely going to dig our teeth into once we get into the offseason. All right, let's see. All right. Mike says on Dont'e Thornton, this is a loss for people who think it's not because we have 5 stars coming in. Goes to show they learned nothing from the Ty Thompson experience. This is a loss for people to think it's not because we have 5 stars coming in. It goes to show. I'm not totally sure what you mean by this, Mike, but I think that maybe you're talking about a point I made earlier where guys can be highly rated, but maybe not see the field too much early on in their college careers. But you got to keep stacking talent, and you got to have guys that are willing to compete. And I'm surely not saying that. I'm not saying that Dante wasn't willing to compete because he did a great job. I'm just saying overall, in terms of you're stacking your roster with a lot of highly touted guys. You want to have guys that are ready to go and aren't gonna they're willing to stick around even if they don't see a ton of snaps. So hopefully I addressed your comment there. All right, what do we have here? Wow, we got a lot of comments. Right, Dean line's important. Yeah, no, this is This is definitely, yeah. So the offensive line and the front seven. This comment from Sco Ducky: we have to get more pressure on QBs next season. The D line needs to be addressed, and I think that this is an area where we could really see a notable leap from 2022 to 2023 under Dan Lanning and the rest of this coaching staff with Tosh Lapoy, Tony Tuioti. Talk about getting your guys in. To fit your scheme, to fit your defense. I thought with how much experience this defensive line had, I really kind of do feel like it was a little bit of an underachieving year. They were great against the run for almost every game except for that Oregon State game and the Georgia game. Actually, the Georgia game, they weren't even that bad, but the Oregon State game was inexcusable. But given all the returning experience that they had, the veterans there with Taki getting added, Keon Ware Hudson seemed like he was playing better, Brendan Dorless. I think that this is one of those groups that you kind of feel like underachieved a little bit, but Casey Rogers was a fantastic addition. We're going to have to see if he has any availability left, but guys like DJ Johnson and Brendan Dorless are probably going to be moving on to the next level. So you look at the guys that they have in this 2023 class, right? You look at one of the most recent commitments for Oregon. You look at Johnny Bowens. He's a big-time addition to shore up the trenches on the defensive line. Maybe you can move him around there with some versatility. You look at Tavita Pomee, who's almost 300 pounds just as a senior in high school. Terrence Green, Michael Gardner, Amari Washington. These are all huge bodies that you're going to be adding. And then you have Sir Mells and Ben Roberts from last year. You're going to have to see how their development's coming along. So you just want to give yourself as many options as possible. But one of the biggest reasons that the portal could be crazy and that we need to talk about is because the 25-man signing cap has been removed. And I believe it's for the foreseeable future. I need to double check, but basically what that means is that you just have to make sure you can go over 25 as long as you don't have more than 85 active scholarships on your roster, I believe. So that's another reason that could contribute to the madness this season. But I absolutely agree that you got to get more guys on the D line. And you definitely want to be too deep there for sure. And you want to get more guys that can affect the quarterback and get some pressure. All right, let's see. Exploring with Ben and Sam asks, think one thing is, what does Sewell and Flo do after the season? Speaking of defense, Flo, I think, has to stay since he hasn't played much until this season. Yeah, these are two of the biggest names we're going to have to monitor this year, as we kind of make our way into the offseason. They still have a bowl, but obviously it kind of feels like the offseason isn't waiting for the season to be over because of all these transfers, because of all the coaching carousel movement across the sport. But Sewell is one of the more interesting guys because I think he didn't necessarily blow up the stat sheet like he did the first 2 years at Oregon, but he hasn't had a bad season by any means. He's still the face of that defense, I think, him alongside Christian Gonzalez. But he's kind of one of those guys that, he's an athletic freak. I think that there's guys in the NFL that are coaches that are looking at him and GMs that are super excited about what he can do. He's a Butkus Award finalist. I really liked and thought he should have been used more in pressure packages to get more to get after the quarterback more. I think that basically the easiest way I would say this is that I think going into the season, it was kind of assumed that Noah Sewell would be moving on to the next level, but maybe how the defense has played this year, maybe you think a little bit about him coming back for another year. But I wouldn't be surprised if Noah Sewell, makes that call to go to the NFL. And then Justin Flo, he, right now, knock on wood, you got one more game left, but he's more or less played his most college football since coming to the college level, kind of had some nagging injuries here and there, but really hasn't played that much even when he was healthy, or certainly not as much that I think fans thought he was going to be playing when he was healthy, right? You thought about that duo with Noah Sewell and Justin Flo, but we saw a lot of Jeff Bossa, saw some more Keith Brown as the season started to wind down, saw some Jackson LeDuc as well. So yeah, I don't know. That's kind of mentioning Gerard's comment here. Gerard talking about the defense, saying, I wouldn't be surprised if Flo transfers. He seems literally lost out on the field at times. On the field sometimes. A new system that he is more suited for might be best for both parties. But that's another thing that we have to consider with, so if we're going to talk about the defense a little bit, we'll have, more episodes in the future, but they're going to be able to have some continuity now, assuming there's not too much shakeup on that side of the ball, seeing that Dan Lanning's a defensive head coach. You have Tosh Lapoy, who would be going into his second year. So if you can have some consistency from year to year, I think that I think that that can go a long way in helping the progression of some of these guys, helping the development of some of these guys. So I think that that's a factor to follow for sure. But we already got to 40 minutes on this episode, and I was definitely not expecting to go that long, but I had a blast. I think what I'm going to do, I might be back later today for another show when we talk about Oregon's offensive coordinator search following Kenny Dillingham's departure to Arizona State to become the next head coach. So I'm going to go ahead and wind down here. If you guys want to find more of me, you can follow me on Twitter at mtorresports. That's the fastest way to find my updates. You can find my written content covering Oregon football recruiting, and Oregon basketball a little bit here and there. We're going to see how much of that coverage we want to do, but things are going to be busy. As we head into December with the transfer portal and the early signing period. So you got to make sure you guys stay tapped in. Hit that like and subscribe button here on YouTube and leave me a comment. We're on the way to 2,000 subscribers, and don't plan on stopping anytime soon or slowing down anytime soon. So make sure you help me out there. And then the last thing, share the podcast, please. It only takes a second out of your day. Share it with your friends, your family, other Duck fans. That's how we do around here. But just trying to grow the community, and your support is incredibly appreciated and what I'm doing trying to cover the Ducks. So that'll do it for us here on this episode. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast.